So good morning, everybody, and welcome to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church Zoom service. My name is Linda Phippen. I think most of you know me, and I'm a member of the worship committee who will be assisting with today's service. So whether you're a longtime member, a friend, or for a newcomer, we're glad to see all of your virtual faces this morning. After the service, please stick around for the Zoom coffee hour, which will start at about 11:30, depending on how long the service goes. We do have a few announcements. Just as a reminder, the Share the Plate partner this quarter is the GLSEN. That's the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, which works to ensure schools are a safe and affirming environment for LGBTQ youth. If you would like to make a donation to this organization, you can visit the website, click the Make a Donation button, and check Share the Plate. Adult RE exploration continues via Zoom on Thursday evenings from 6:30 to 8. And everyone is welcome to attend, whether you've ever been to one of these previous meetings or not. Carol, did you want to say anything about?
Everybody who's here has heard to some degree or other us talking about the upcoming events.
Okay.
But for the purpose of the recording,
Okay.
For those of you who are listening to the service later, and if you haven't heard this information, this Thursday, the 22nd, and Thursday, the 29th, we will be talking about LGBTQ+ issues in our Thursday evening discussion. And next Sunday's service on the 25th will also be on that topic. We'll be introducing some information about a book that we're going to invite everyone to read, which is called The ABCs of LGBT+. It's great. The first 5 pages of it are like literally a dictionary of wonderful terms we all need to learn about LGBTQ+ issues. And it's a great book to talk about issues in the community that we may or may not know about. So the book, we will be starting the common read in the next week or so. And I have copies here at the church if someone wants to pick one up. And also the month of June will be the month that we actually have our book discussions. So that's what's happening around that.
Okay. And I'm sure most of you know Canvas season. So if you have not yet dropped off or otherwise provided your pledge form, you can send it by snail mail to the Westside Church address, attention to the Finance Chair, or by email to Westside Finance Chair Suzanne Molnar. Lastly, not quite lastly. If any of you are planning to participate in the Adopt a Mile cleanup for next weekend, that has actually been postponed and the new date has not been set yet. I'll keep you posted. Last thing, just to save the date for the congregational meeting, which will be via Zoom on May 23rd after that day's Zoom service in place of the coffee hour. At this meeting, we will be voting on the budget and the Board of Trustees, and anyone can attend, but as you know, only members can vote. And we'll keep you posted with more information about that as we get closer. Does anybody else here have any announcements they would like to make? Okay. All right. I have some words for the chalice lighting while Reverend Carol will light the service. These come from Melanie Davis, and it's called Exploring Who We Are. Under the right circumstances, playing with fire is a delight. Imagine being gathered round a fire pit as the crackling flames invite us to sing, dance, and roast a marshmallow or two. Our chalice also invites us to play, although with ideas rather than with marshmallows. The flame encourages us to explore who we are, who our neighbors are, and where we are on our spiritual journeys. Today, we light this chalice in the spirit of play. Let us trust the light to guide us in this hour and in the days to come, finding joy along the way. Now I'll turn things over to Reverend Carol for our story.
Before we do our story, I want to thank Wendy first for being such a constant reminder of the things happening in our community. And we're going to light a candle. And Wendy, if you could speak, it's Anthony Tompkins, right? If you could just say a few words for us about that, unmuting.
Yeah, His name is Anthony Thompson Jr., and he was the 17-year-old boy who was shot at Austin East High School, and that community has been undergoing a lot of gun violence. This was a police officer shooting at the school, and he was a 17-year-old boy who lost his life in that altercation. So if we can keep the Austin East community in our hearts and in our minds and reach out, there's very specific ways. I'll be writing a blog this week, which will give us really good sense of what that community is asking for from its allies in our community.
Thanks, Wendy. Thank you. And thank you for being the person who's keeping track of all that for us. Really appreciate that. So our story today is about community, and it's a story that I'm sure many of you have heard before. So it's a story about a village. And there's a village in a time of great struggle and famine and difficulty. And in such a time, people they're hoarding their resources. They're kind of keeping to themselves. They're protecting themselves and protecting what they have to survive. And into the village walks, in this version of the story, a soldier. Soldier walks into the village. And he asks different people he meets about finding a place to stay. And people say, no, we can't share anything. We can't share anything. We don't have enough. And he says, oh, no, I'm fine. I'm good. I have all I need. I just thought you all might like a visitor with some entertainment. And they say, what do you mean? And he says, well, I have this magic stone. And I have this soup pot. And I thought you all might like to share some stone soup. And they look at him like, that's crazy, right? You're crazy. So he pulls out the pot and he puts water in it. And he builds a fire under the pot. And the water starts to get hot. And he takes the magic stone and he places it in the pot. Into the pot goes the magic stone. And the people are curious. They come and they look around and they're looking at it. What is he thinking? And he's saying, oh, this is going to make the best stone soup. I can't wait. It's going to be delicious. And the people are like, what's stone soup? And he says, oh, the stone soup is wonderful. It's a little better with cabbage, but without it, it's fine. And someone says, I have a cabbage. And they run off and they get their cabbage and they bring it back. And he says, wonderful. And he chops up the cabbage and he puts it in the soup. Fabulous. And they watch it boil. And he says, the best stone soup I ever had a little bit of beef in it, but this is going to be great. And someone says, I have a little bit of beef. And they run off and they bring back the beef. And so it goes. People bringing a carrot or an onion or a potato or a little bit of celery, and somebody else has some salt, and somebody else says, well, I have some bread that would go great with the soup, and then someone else has some apples from their apple tree, and so it goes. And pretty soon they have a meal. And the pot is bubbling and boiling, and eventually everyone is invited to eat what they like and what's good, and they're filled. Well, they say to the soldier, we'll give you whatever you want for this stone. He says, no. And he says, I'll just spend one night and then I'll move on. And that's what he did. He spent one night in the village and then he moved on. So we've all heard that story probably, right? It's not a new story to us. I could not say when I first heard that story or how old I was or who told it to me, but I've certainly heard it many times. And I know that for me, sometimes this story makes me a little uncomfortable, right? Especially when it comes at Canvas time and pledge time, right? Because it gets used all the time at the time of year when churches are saying, please give us your money. And that I can't tell you how many services that I have heard of or participated in during this time of year when churches use it. And I thought, it's a great story to talk about community, but for me, there's a certain sense of obligation or pressure. And for some of us, the feeling of social pressure to contribute can be really uncomfortable, depending on what our circumstances, what our needs are, and where we are in our lives. So I really started thinking about this story in a different way, because it's really not necessarily about obligation so much as it is about magic and social magic. So I learned some things about this story and where it comes from. This story, the first published version of it, comes from a collection of posthumously published letters by a French folklorist, and actually a very notorious, not just notable, but notorious journaliste, who is named Madame de Noailles. And Madame de Noailles, she was a writer at a time, I mean, this is the early 1700s when women didn't do that sort of thing. Her name was Anne Marguerite Petit de Noailles, and she was a very well-known early 18th century writer. She was pretty famous for reporting and writing about the Peace of Utrecht, which was a big deal at the time in a bunch of war that was going on with Spain. Her personal reputation was not so good. As you might guess, a woman who had the audacity to write at a time like that was also getting herself in some other fixes. Her husband had public office, and he got in trouble for mismanaging or doing something shady with public funds, public revenue. And she was known for quickly changing her religion to suit social situations. So she started out as Calvinist, and then when the political scene changed, she switched to being a Catholic. And then around the time that her husband got in trouble with the law, she switched to being Calvinist again, which gave her the perfect excuse to exile herself out of France to Holland. So she left and went to Holland with her daughters, leaving her husband to deal with his own problems in France. So she was kind of notorious. She was known for kind of flaunting society's norms and doing what she wanted. I said this morning to the group that was here in person, she would have probably been a Unitarian Universalist had she had that opportunity in her time. But despite all this notoriety, she was quite famous for being a really good writer. And her version of the stone soup story, which was published in 1720, is a little different than certainly the one I told this morning, and one that is the one that's more often told now. It's a story that has been adapted over time to different social circumstances. Her version is set in Normandy, in northern France. And instead of a soldier coming into town, which was an adaptation that happened, as war and relevance of soldiers became a social need, in her story, it was two Jesuits, two religious men, traveling religious men, who come seeking food. But now what's really important in her version of the story is they insist they are self-sufficient. They are self-sufficient. They need nothing. That's a very important part of the story. They insist that they have a magical stone. And the first people that they encounter with this stone, it's not grown-ups, it's children. And this is important because the dominant motif in her version of the story is the magic, which makes the children's presence more important, right? They're more likely to be curious about the magic. The word that she uses in her version of the story to describe the stone is curieux, curious, right? And it's magical. It's a curious stone. It's a curious stone, magical. And what draws the villagers is this sense of magic and wonder. Okay, so usually when this story is told during the pledge campaign, what's emphasized is how important it is to survive, that you've got to put something in the pot if we're going to survive, right? It's sort of a fear. There's a fear or pressure kind of tone to it. And, I have my own tendencies to think, well, there are times for that. Many of us have been in conversations about the way things are changing here at Westside, right? There's a lot of uncertainty just in our lives right now. We're not really sure what's going to happen over the next year in a lot of ways. So, for example, here at Westside, we know that we're going to continue virtual and in-person church, but we don't have a clue how we're going to actually manage that. We're doing some experiments, but there's probably going to be some uncertainty in how that plays out. We're not sure how we're going to do that resource-wise. You know, in the past, we had resources for one service, staff and money and all that. We don't have the resources to up to 2 services. And we might. Another uncertainty is in this time, we don't know what our resources are going to be in the coming year because our community's changed. So we also don't know what the community is going to look like. We have people in the community who've completely just not participated in anything for the last year who've said, I'll see you when everything's back to normal. We have people who've continued to come to outdoor services or Zoom as if nothing changed. And we have other people who are newer or who've never, some of you have really never even been at our building, and whose preference, I'm not saying that's necessarily you, but some people whose preference is to always stay on virtual church, where virtual church is going to be their priority. We're not really sure how can be easy in a time of uncertainty to slip into that. So, telling the story today, I'm really thinking more about the magic part of it. Is really important in this story. The French word curieux or curieux, depending on whether it's inquisitive, questioning, being willing to ask questions. But it also can mean singular, unusual, even magical. Wow, that's a curious hat she's wearing. Well, that was a curious event. Those are curious circumstances, right? It carries a hint of spectacle, watching, wondering, observing, maybe expecting a little bit of surprise, excitement, eagerness. So that's where I think we can go with this story. I wonder if we can be curious, which means to be engaged without expectations, not really knowing what the outcome is going to be. Okay, does it work now? You have to be curious. You cannot predict what's going to happen. Never know. Never know. So, okay. So, sometimes stuff turns out the way you want it to, and sometimes it doesn't. You just never know how it's going to turn out. So let's think about this soup some more, right? You show up thinking things are going to go a certain way, wanting a certain kind of soup, expecting to turn out a certain way, but you don't really necessarily know what's going to happen or what's going to be in the soup, right? Technology may go out on you. Something may happen during the service you didn't expect. Someone may say something in a class that you weren't prepared for. All sorts of things can happen. Why in the world would we want to throw our lot in with all that mess and all that potential for catastrophe, all that potential for discomfort? Why in the world would we want to do that? We are a culture that has become accustomed to consumer thinking. I want this thing. I paid for this thing. I want the thing I paid for. If you can't provide it for me, I will go somewhere else where they can give me the doorknob I want. Community isn't like that. Community isn't like that. Here's the point. The result of the stone soup magic isn't the soup. The soup isn't the point. The point is the magic of creating a meal together. That's the point. Someone brings bread, someone brings cheese, someone brings apples. I might not be able to eat the soup itself because somebody put meat in it and I'm a vegetarian, or I might be allergic to onions, right? But if we all show up and we bring something and we're curious, we're probably going to get fed. Even if on some days, like happens for potluck, for me, I bring my own lunch. And the meal isn't about what somebody else brought for food. It's about me having my own food that I brought for myself and getting to eat it in good company. sitting with other people that I care about and who care about me, even if they don't understand my food sensitivities. So that's really it, right? Of course, that's the whole point of community. Some days community brings us tasty, wonderful things that are exactly what we wanted. And some days community brings us things that give us a little indigestion. Some days community brings us something we never tried before and it's surprisingly wonderful. Some days it brings us things that we've tried and we're not sure, we might try it again. We don't know, right? The point is we're not here for the soup. We get confused and think that we're here for the soup, but we're not here for the soup. We're here for the magic. And it's important to remember that. The real power of what happens in community is the surprising stuff. It's the stuff that we get fed in our souls and our minds and our hearts. And sometimes the best food for those things is not what we expected. Sometimes the surprising things are the best food for our heart or mind or soul, right? So sometimes, I really needed the cabbage you brought. Like that was what I really wanted. And sometimes that's not what I really wanted, but it was still good. So the point of taking the risk of social engagement, and it is a risk because sometimes that risk will have costs. Sometimes we will be uncomfortable. Sometimes we'll make mistakes. Sometimes we'll be angry. Sometimes we'll be shocked. Sometimes we'll just be bored or disappointed. But other times that's not what's going to happen. Other times we're going to be surprised. The point of taking the risk of showing up in community is for the magic that's possible, right? Magic doesn't just happen because we command it to. It's uncertain. So having that magic happen really requires two things. The first is just being willing to show up. Just show up with your cabbage or your onion or whatever, or even empty-handed. Just show up. And the second thing that's probably even more important, frankly, especially in our world right now, which is uncertain, is curiosity. That spirit of being curious, right? Having the willingness to be open-minded to see what happens, even if it doesn't match our expectations, right? So that, of course, that applies to pledges, right? That applies to the financial resources, but it's really, those are just like secondary to the emotional and spiritual and mental resources, right? Because the more willing we are to show up with curiosity and openness, the more willing we're going to be to share our resources, right? So in the spirit of sharing, I had my big soup pot. It's in another room right now, which is fine because this is the time of uncertainty. But I want us to have the opportunity to put some things in the soup pot. So here's what I'm going to invite you to do. I'm going to play a piece of music. I'm going to invite you to write in the chat anything that you would like to have be part of the West Side Soup in the next year, or the meal. Like maybe that's social justice. Maybe that's marches. Maybe that's education about local issues. Maybe it's potlucks. Maybe it's outdoor activities. Maybe it's a class. Whatever it is, write it in the chat. This is your chance to type in the chat while I play music, and then we'll just, as our last thing we do today, we'll just read some of those. So I'm gonna play some music and you can start typing in the chat whatever it is you would, as many things as you'd like. Things maybe you'll bring, or things you're hoping or trusting somebody else will bring. Thank you all for sharing, and thank you. That's David Rose, Song of Gratitude. Just going to read through some of these things you guys have put in the chat. Enjoying the Zoom services. Diane said, enjoying the Zoom services and hoping they continue. Maybe some adult RE times that are different, so that we can have more participation. Music, learning about justice and supporting the community. working on some justice issues like healthcare, gun reform, voting rights, and a community garden. Yep, you're not the only one, Curtis, who wants to put in a plug for a community garden. Yep. Mental health issues and more music. So lots of things. And in our service, oops, hang on. David Rowe wants to continue participating in our service. He's singing for us some more. We had some other things that people put in the soup pot this morning, things like outdoor activities for small groups. And actually it was really funny. We'd been doing the stone soup thing. And so somebody actually put in the soup pot that they wanted cheese, specifically cheese. So I think a sense of play and humor was in there, and peace and a whole kindness and a lot of things. So these are all the things we have the opportunity to create.
Carol,
Yeah.
I tried to put something in the chat, but I can't figure out how that works.
And just tell us what it is, Judy.
I don't want holiday parties.
Yep. Holiday parties and fun gatherings. That's been a big part of Westside's culture for a long time. Judy, I don't know if you know about this, but June 5th, Saturday, June 5th, we are planning an outdoor auction party here at the church. So we will actually be having a party. You're welcome to join us for that. Yeah, so there's a lot that people want to have happening here. So let us be grateful for all of it. Let's be grateful for the journey we're on together and for the magic. I have to remind myself sometimes, but I find that it's really helpful to be grateful for the magic when I don't get the things I do want, and I do get things that I don't want. So sometimes we don't get what we want, and sometimes we do get what we don't want. But even then there's magic. Sometimes we get something we didn't know we wanted and we're surprised. I think that song of gratitude is an important helper in all of this. To be grateful for whatever it is that comes in community, even the surprises, whether we think they're good surprises or bad surprises, even the bad surprises can lead to magic. So I invite us all to be curious, to be like Madame de Noyer, to be curieux, and to be enthusiastic and open-minded about the future and about the magic we can create together. And I am grateful for all of you sharing that journey with us.